I'm Angela.
And I'm Paige.
In the 7 years that Paige and I have been friends, we have shared true crime stories that we are obsessed with. This podcast is a hobby discussing the intricate details of true crime cases. Welcome to the Corrupt Podcast.
We assume no responsibility or liability for any errors or omissions in the content of this episode. The Corrupt Podcast is based on the facts and opinions of the case. Listener discretion is advised. Today we're talking about the Golden State Killer case. Joseph James DeAngelo was a voyeur, serial killer, and rapist in the 1970s and 80s. DeAngelo had many names: the Golden State Killer, the East Area Rapist, Visalia Ransacker, and the Diamond Knot Killer. You will also hear us refer to him as the EAR-ONS, which is an acronym for the East Area Rapist-Original Night Stalker. DeAngelo was responsible for at least 120 burglaries, 51 rapes, and 13 murders before familial DNA solved this case in 2018. This episode does include details on sexual assault, including assault of minors and animal abuse.
Joseph James DeAngelo Jr. was born on November 8, 1945, to Kathleen and Joseph James DeAngelo Sr. Joseph Sr. was in the United States Air Force. Joe's childhood was spent moving from military base to military base throughout Germany and the U.S. Joseph Sr. was physically abusive to Kathleen, and eventually he was stationed in Florida, but Kathleen and the kids stayed in California. Kathleen did move on with another man, and Joe felt he was left to take care of his siblings, even though he was the second youngest of 4 kids. Joe did not have a good relationship with either parent, but was known to get into screaming matches with his mother. In 1954, while stationed in West Germany, Joe witnessed the sexual assault of his 7-year-old sister by 2 airmen on the base. Joe was just 9 years old at the time.
So I think him being 9 years old and watching his 7-year-old sister be raped, may have affected him, in the long run. He lost control on that day.
Totally.
And he needs to take control now. He's eating the food out of people's fridge as a power play, eating their Christmas dinner. It's all about power play. He goes to trial. It's acting like he's a weak old man, and he's definitely not. I think it really affected him in the long run.
He has to be in control
of everything.
Of every situation.
It makes you, what was his situation? What was his marriage life with Sharon? Was he extremely controlling of her? Makes you wonder.
And I wonder how that happened, with the witnessing his sister.
Yeah, and they were German airmen. So were they 1954, were they on the base?
Probably.
It's terrible.
When Joe was in high school, there were burglaries and peeping Tom events in the area. He would also kill animals by blowing them up.
Yikes.
Joe enlisted in the Navy in 1964. He spent 4 years in the Navy, 3 of which were on tour in Vietnam. In 1968, DeAngelo left the Navy. In 1972, Joe received a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. At 26 years old, Joe interns with Roswell, California Police Department. In 1973, Joe married Sharon Marie Huddle. He was 27 years old and Sharon was 20 years old. He was also hired as a police officer in Exeter, California. Exeter was just 2 cities over from Visalia and a 15-minute drive away. He worked at this police department until 1976.
So he's the ultimate criminal. He is working during the day, casing out these houses, and at night he's attacking people.
You can't trust anybody.
No, you should be safe. He's law enforcement, right?
He is a police officer.
Yeah. He's literally getting paid.
And he's going around.
And he's so smart. He got all of this education, criminal justice education.
Yeah.
And then prowling.
And then learning how to tie the knots.
Yes, from the Navy.
From the Navy.
Mm-hmm. Yep, scary stuff. Just 15-minute drive over.
I don't know if I would necessarily call him smart. I think I would call him structured.
Smart. Oh, structured. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think he was very book smart. He was smart enough to go to school.
Yes.
He studied to be the prowler.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. But is it life goals? I don't think so.
Hiding his second life.
Yeah, from poor Sharon. In 1974, Joe requested to work as a detective and got promoted. This allowed him to have a day job and prowl at night. This is when the Visalia Ransacker burglaries began. DeAngelo broke into the homes between April 1974 and December 1975. Initially, just ransacking or stealing inconvenient items, like a single earring or a stamp collection, but he would leave the victims cash. He would use lotion, which is really gross and disturbing.
Ew.
He would steal photos and go through the women's underwear drawers. He placed glass objects on top of doorknobs so he could hear if someone was entering. The Visalia Ransacker did follow-up calls threatening the victim lives. 100 to 120 homes were burglarized in just 2 years. Eventually, the Visalia Ransacker progressed to voyeurism and targeting single women for the burglary. In 1975, police launched an anti-burglary program, but Joe was the lead officer to serve for Exeter on the task force. So again, he's being paid taxpayer money.
Yes.
To become a better criminal. And then just 6 months after the Visalia Ransacker stopped, the East Area Rapist attacks began.
So we're starting to see his MO change.
Yes.
So he went from burglaring to
now he's targeting
victims and becoming the East Area Rapist.
Yeah, it's about to take a dark turn. On August 31st, 1975, Pat Mono came home and found the biggest mess he'd ever seen. Everything was dumped on the floor. Jewelry was spread out on the dresser. In his daughter's room, one earring out of each set was missing, and a photo of his daughter had been stolen. A .38 caliber gun was also stolen. A couple weeks after the burglary, his wife answered the phone and screamed from what she heard on the other line and dropped it. Pat grabbed the phone and asked who it was. The guy on the other line said, "I'm going to tell you the same thing I told your wife. I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill her, and I'm going to kill your daughter." Pat told him, "Well, you know where I live. You know who I am. You're more than welcome to come over and try. I'll be waiting for you," and hung up.
My man.
I know. It is impressive.
I loved seeing him when I watched the documentary.
I hope he went out and bought another gun. Like, I really do.
I loved seeing him say this, like, on television. It was great.
Claude Snelling was Joe's first murder victim on September 11th, 1975. Committed during his Visalia Ransacker phase, Joe attempted to kidnap Elizabeth Snelling, 16 years old at the time. Her father, Claude, interrupted the kidnapping but was shot 2 times and died in the attack. Elizabeth was kicked in the face 3 times before the attacker fled. This murder was not connected to Joe until 2018, so it's not always listed as his first murder.
What a date as well.
Yes, September 11th. Mm-hmm. For his first one.
Yeah.
And also, I think this is kind of where maybe his thought process changed. You know, he went from being burglary to attempting a kidnap. So was that his plan of attack going forward, is he was going to kidnap people? And then this went so wrong that he was like, okay, I'm just going to break in and start, you know, leaving rape victims in their homes instead of taking them out of their homes. It does kind of make you wonder. It's a interesting segue before things go really dark. I mean, obviously, poor Claude lost his life.
But good for him, you know?
He
like protecting his
daughter.
daughter.
Yeah, he really protected
as
her.
a father should, and I bet she really appreciates that.
Oh, I'm sure.
To this day.
On December 11th, 1975, 3 teams of officers were placed within a specific neighborhood where they thought the ransacker would attack. Detective McGowan had hidden in a garage. At 8:30 p.m., they saw the ransacker. The detective followed the suspect in the backyards down the side of the house. McGowan confronted the suspect, and the suspect put his hands up and began to turn around to show he was complying. The suspect immediately pulled his gun out and shot McGowan. But luckily, the shot hit the detective's flashlight, throwing shrapnel into his face and eyes. McGowan was on the ground, and the ransacker ran off. There were no known cases of the Visalia Ransacker after this, and 6 months later, rapes started in Sacramento as the East Area Rapist.
So he had to be holding the flashlight close to his face.
He must have had it up by his eye.
Yeah, for it to hit his eye.
And would it have been glass back then? Like, he could have got really hurt. I mean, he got really lucky that... Because you're doing, you know, a detective against a detective, so they both would have a good shot. And so he got really lucky that it hit the flashlight instead of probably his eye or his head.
Dodge that bullet, literally. Back then, Sacramento had, like a small town feel in 1976. People didn't lock their doors. The EAR victims would describe their attacker as 5'9", white man in his late teens to early 20s, size 9 shoes, blonde or light brown hair, and brown eyes with athletic build. Sometimes he was described as having a baby face. He always wore a mask and spoke in the forced whisper through clenched teeth. The EAR attacked the middle to upper class victims in single-story homes. The victims' hands were tied so tight, some of their hands turned black. It took days until they would have feeling again in them. Most of the time, these ligatures would belong to the victim, but sometimes the EAR would bring his own. All victims were gagged, blindfolded, and their hands were tied behind their back. The EAR would go into the kitchen and eat their food or drink their beer. He would go on the back patio and relax while victims are frozen in their house. The victims would usually lie motionless for 20 to 30 minutes, thinking he had left, and when they would start to move, he would be right there, threatening. He would kill them and not to move.
How terrifying.
Yeah, I don't know what would be going in my mind.
The PTSD.
Yes.
You think about, he shows up in the night, he appears in your doorway, and then you think he's gone, but he's not. In 20 to 30 minutes.
No, thank you.
No, thank you.
In 1976, Joe had accepted a new position as a police officer at Auburn Police Department. The first known assault by the East Area Rapist was on June 18, 1976. 22-year-old Phyllis Henman woke up to Joe in her bedroom doorway. Phyllis was gagged and raped. Her hands were left tied behind her back, but after Joe left, she managed to dial 0 and was directed to the police department. In the weeks leading up to the assault, Phyllis received multiple hang-up phone calls like someone was confirming her schedule. In April 1976, she thought she was being followed by a medium-sized American-made car, but she never did see the driver.
But she thought she was being followed.
Yeah, that would creep me out.
That haunts her to this day. And it might not have even been him, but she saw that vehicle. And I don't know that they ever ID him to a certain vehicle. It's not like Bundy where they tell you that he's driving a yellow, VW.
Yeah, I don't know. Because obviously you wouldn't be looking, like if he was in his patrol vehicle, you wouldn't be looking for that.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be looking at a cop snooping around or following you. But I don't know.
Yeah, was he on duty or off duty?
Both. On July 17th, 1976, Peggy, Frank, and her sister were attacked. The two sisters were just teenagers at the time. Peggy was 15 years old and her sister was 16 years old. Peggy came forward in 2020 to deliver a victim impact statement at the trial. Previously, she had been anonymous. Both girls were beaten and Peggy was raped repeatedly. I would not like seeing my sister...
I know. And they're teenagers.
In that state.
And their poor parents.
Oh, yeah. Jane Carson was the fifth EAR victim on October 5th, 1976 in Sacramento, California. Jane's husband was a captain in the Air Force, and Jane was in the Air Force Nurse Corps. Their house was broken into 2 weeks before the attack. Jane was in bed snuggling her 3-year-old son. I don't like reading that part.
It's sad.
After her husband left for work, she hears someone running down the hallway and bursts into her room with a flashlight and a large butcher knife. The EAR was wearing a ski mask. He took the toddler to the next room, gagged and blindfolded. The EAR told Jane initially that he was going to burglarize her and not hurt her, but then also tells her to shut up or I'll kill you. The EAR stated he saw her at the O Club at the military base the week prior. Only someone in the military would call it the O Club instead of the Officers Club. Then he rapes her repeatedly, leaves her blindfolded, but brings her son back to the room with her. Jane was poked in the shoulder by a paring knife during the attack. After this, the East Area Rapist abuse seems to escalate. like scissors next to a blindfolded victim's face, threats to remove fingers and toes, and eventually murder. Carol Daly was one of the first women law enforcement officers.
Whoop, whoop.
The men officers doubted Carol, how dare they, that they thought she was asking women leading questions, so they asked her to start recording with tape. How offended would you be?
I would be very offended. I would be very offended, especially when they're not treating the victims right anyways.
I mean,
the
my
men
goodness.
officers, yeah.
Yeah. I would be so offended. These women or victims felt uncomfortable with being around men officers since they were, just raped. Carol gave them comfort. Carol took Jane to the hospital and they sat for 2 hours while still not being seen. Carol had to talk to the hospital staff that rape victims can't wait 2 or 3 hours before they've been seen. They start to lose evidence, and this would add another trauma to the victims. I mean, to think to just sit there in the hospital for another 2 to 3 hours.
Yeah.
And while you're, not showered or
You've
anything.
Just been violated. And then you're going to
Yes.
sit there in the emergency room, which is already a hot mess. Like, nobody wants to sit in the ER anyways.
No.
And then you've got these
Especially us.
then you've got these poor women that have been, they're victims. Like,
People staring at you,
right.
Oh,
absolutely. Winnie Schultz was attacked in Sacramento, California overnight on October 18th, 1976. The EAR broke into the house of Winnie and her family. Winnie's son was tied to his bedpost and her daughter was locked in her room. Joe then raped Winnie. Victim number 9 was attacked in possibly November 1976. She remains anonymous. 6 of the first 10 victims were teenagers, and this victim was just 16 years old. Joe broke into her home when she was alone and mentioned "in the dark" twice to her, but told her, "You'll be silent forever and I'll be gone in the dark." Victim number 9 was taken from her home and into a drainage ditch, but not raped. The EAR asked her if she went to college, but she didn't go to college, and it's possible that this attack was different because the EAR thought that she was someone else. The questions asked about the college she went to applied to her neighbor and not victim number 9. So they think this was another kind of mess up on his part, was that he picked the wrong girl. He broke into the wrong house. She talked about in her interview that he would put her in the ditch and then go up to the top of the hill and kind of look left and look right like he was waiting for something or watching for something. It made her think that there were more people involved, like maybe he was waiting for other people. And then eventually he just leaves her in the ditch and runs away.
That's weird.
It's definitely not his MO. Chris Pedetri was 15 years old on December 18th, 1976. Her parents were at a Christmas party that evening. Chris had put a pizza in the oven, set a timer, and sat down to play piano. She heard a sound, stopped playing, but resumed piano after not hearing another sound. Chris saw a flash of light and a knife was at her throat. DeAngelo asked her about money and when her parents would be home, so kind of like a robbery. But he's not actually intending to rob her.
No, he had other plans.
Yeah. He took her to the back patio and blindfolded her. He left her on the porch naked in December. She could hear him going through the house. Eventually, the East Area Rapist raped her 3 times and acted like he was leaving the room between each time, but was there any time she moved and was threatening to kill her. Joe told her that, "I'll be gone in the dark of the night." After 90 minutes, she was brave enough to move with tied ankles and bound arms behind her back and found that the attacker had fled. He told her he had seen her around school, which seems like another power play just to make her nervous. After the assault, her parents told her not to talk about it, which led to her feeling that the attack was in some way her fault.
So this confirms that he is not only doing physical harm to the victim, but he's playing mental games.
Mm-hmm. The psychological abuse as well. Talking about seeing her at school when he didn't see her around school. Also, the 70s and her parents telling her not to talk about it. And there was a lot of the blame game going around. Are these girls too beautiful? Did they change in front of their windows and that provoked him in some way? Just the ridiculousness of it. He is targeting them and they're acting like, oh, well, maybe she left the blinds cracked and this is clearly her fault.
Exactly. A 15-year-old is going to do that.
Right. Like, she's at no way at fault. And she needed some therapy, not for somebody to tell her not to talk about it. The East Area Rapist Task Force was created by the Sacramento Police Department to solely review the cases. In 1977, gun sales skyrocketed. Media released details that he only liked to attack when women were alone, and just out of spite, the EAR started attacking couples within weeks of this media release.
Yeah, I would be buying a gun too.
Absolutely. A bunch of guns, but he does that, he's casing these houses, so these women think they have guns in the house, but he's already taken the bullets out. So there was no way to protect themselves. He's going in and loosening up the windows. So you think you've got all these deadbolt locks on your doors. You think the window's locked up tight, and it's not. He's actually, wiggled that frame loose. He's just going to use a bird bath to step on into the window, into their house.
See, I would be diligently, checking everything like I am now.
I was going to say.
After this...
After the deep dive into this case, we're checking our windows and our doors.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, my. On February 16th, 1977, Rodney Miller hears a sound outside his window and sees a prowler in between his house and the neighbor. Rodney confronts and chases the EAR down and is shot in the stomach. Ouch.
Poor Rodney.
Rodney suffered massive internal injuries but survived. A piece of the bullet still remains inside him today. DeAngelo gets away, but Rodney was able to get a good look at him and composite a sketch that was made. Unfortunately, the composite sketch wasn't very close to Joe's actual appearance. All of the sketches agreed on a thin mouth, but his eyes, nose, and face structure were very often wrong. It's amazing that they could come up with composites at all, since he wore the ski mask at all times. There were 2 attacks in February 1977. One was a 30-year-old woman in Carmichael. She was attacked with her 7-year-old daughter in the room. The second one was another woman fought the EAR for the gun. She was struck on the head with the gun, but a drop of the attacker's blood ended up in her hair. This blood confirmed the EAR was A positive.
This was a huge break in the case.
Yes, and good for her.
Mm-hmm. She fought back, and even just that one drop of blood, that eventually is going to help nail him.
Mm-hmm. If I could shake her hand, I would. On March 8th, 1977, a woman got separated from her husband and got attacked. A news article ran about it being the first couple to be targeted. The EAR attacked 11 couples in a row after that. The sheriff's department received 3 calls between 4:15 and 5 p.m. on March 18th, 1977. The caller identified himself as the EAR before hanging up on the first 2 calls. On the 3rd call, he told the sheriff's office that he had his next victim stalked, and they couldn't stop him. That night, a 16-year-old in Rancho Cordova was attacked. A young couple was attacked on April 2nd, 1977. The boyfriend had a teacup and a saucer placed on his back. The EAR told the victim if he heard a rattle or the mattress springs move, he would shoot everyone in the house. By the end of April, the EAR had 17 victims, which averages 2 victims a month.
2 victims a month.
He was on a rampage.
Mm-hmm.
On May 2nd, 1977, a 30-year-old woman and her husband were attacked in their home.
A man in a ski mask and possibly a U.S. Navy jacket lunged out of the darkness and attacked a woman and her male coworker on the way to her car on May 4th, 1977. Linda Odell and her husband were well aware of the EAR. They had recently moved into a 1-story home and installed deadbolt locks. Unfortunately, the EAR had cased the home and had found a way to get in through a back window. On the evening of May 14th, 1977, Linda and her husband went out to dinner. When they came back home, the neighbor kids came right up to their car and told them there was a man in their yard. They went to bed later that night and were woken up to the flashlight in their faces and at knife point. The EAR had Linda tie her husband's hands, but she did it very loosely, and the suspect retied them tight. Joe then put dishes on her husband's back. They were told if Joe heard the dishes moving, he would cut off her husband's ear. Linda was raped at knife point. After the ear left, Linda checked on her husband and he stated she had to get help because the circulation was cut off from his hands. Linda ran to the neighbors and the cops were called. Her husband threw her nightshirt away that she had been wearing that night and did not want to talk about the assault.
So I know we don't want to think about it, but if we had to, and we had to tie our husband's hands behind their backs, would you choose to tie it tightly?
Oh, no, it's loose.
Or loose?
Oh, yeah, we're going loose.
See, my mind, I would think, my goodness, like, is the attacker gonna actually kill us then if I don't listen to him and do it properly?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so I would do medium. I would do loose and a little bit of tight.
Your husband's a ninja, though, so he could probably just get it untied anyways. He can do anything.
I don't know about a ninja.
I think he could just get it untied. Whatever a diamond knot is, I feel like your husband would just be like, oh yeah, no problem. I've got this.
He's not a ninja. He's a woodworker, but not a ninja.
We're going to have to test this. A couple was attacked in their Del Deo home. Community meetings were held for women to learn how to protect themselves. At a meeting in November 1976, a man stood up and started yelling at other men who allowed their women to be attacked by the offender. He said, "I'm not going to have this happen to my wife." This man and his wife became the victims on May 17, 1977. This confirmed that the killer was in the audience at this particular meeting.
If I was that couple, I would look back on that day and like try to find his face. I don't know, try to...
Absolutely, because there's photos of it, but there were 500 people in attendance. And was he in uniform or not in uniform?
Yeah.
Like he could have been there just as a civilian, one of 500 in the crowd.
Yeah, that would be hard.
Just 10 days after the Del Deo attack on May 27, 1977, Fiona and Philip Williams, pseudonyms, were attacked. They heard a scratching sound after Philip was off work for the evening. It was the ear with a gun feigning a burglary. The Williams' 3-year-old son witnessed some of the attack. He saw his mom being blindfolded and walking down the hallway. But the ear told their son to go back to his room, and Joe then raped Fiona. It's just the terror of that and how great their 3-year-old was that he got up, he saw that, and he was like, okay, I'm gonna go to the bathroom and then go back to bed. And hopefully he did, and he didn't realize anything.
On October 1st, 1977, Victor George Hayes, 21, and his girlfriend Rhonda Ortiz, 17, were attacked, which lasted approximately 30 minutes. Victor seemed like a very prepared person, with the shotgun leaning on his bedroom wall and a handgun underneath his mattress. The ear broke in and pulled out a pair of shoelaces, tossed them onto the mattress, and ordered Victor to lie on his stomach while his girlfriend tied his hands and placed dishes on his back, telling him not to move or he'll kill him. Then the ear took Victor's girlfriend, Rhonda, out of the room and raped her. Periodically, the rapist returned to the bedroom to check on Victor, putting a gun to his head. It was on the third trip to his room that the ear revealed to Victor, and quote, "I'm going to party with Sharon." Sharon happened to be Victor's mother, who was 38 and lived a few blocks away. Luckily, some of Victor's friends knocked on the door and scared the ear. After about 5 minutes, Victor called out to his girlfriend asking if the attacker had left. She told him she thought so. Victor untied himself and pulled out his handgun from underneath the mattress. He tiptoed to each room to scope the area and make sure it was very clear. He eventually got to see the look on his girlfriend's face, which was, in his words, brutal. Victor walked outside through his front yard into the middle of the street and yelled the F-bomb at the top of his lungs, then discharged his weapon, hoping the ear would hear him.
Hopefully into the ground. Hopefully he discharged that weapon into the ground.
Hopefully. They didn't say specifically. He then went inside and comforted his girlfriend by holding her. Once police showed up, Victor felt like they were treated like trash. Even at one point, a pair of crime scene technicians laughed to themselves.
And I think that was just the times. You know, the police didn't know how to handle a serial rapist. They didn't know how to handle a serial murderer. I'm not sure that was even a term that they knew at that point. The detectives that worked on this case for 30 years would say that they would know who he was because they would have a feeling in their gut. And I think there was a lot of that, like, feeling, like it was feeling oriented. It was more emotional then than maybe now with the forensics being involved.
I mean, I would think it would be common sense to the police officers to not not read
laugh.
the room. Yeah.
Read the room.
You know, my girlfriend got raped.
My 17-year-old girlfriend.
Yeah, which that's another story. He was a little overage for her, wasn't he?
We're not judging here.
Yeah, but I mean, let's also think the ear probably targeted him, I feel like, because he mentioned his mom, Sharon.
Yes. He really did his research.
Yeah.
Which means he knew where Sharon probably lived.
Yeah. I don't know. That's eerie. On November 10th, 1977, Margaret Wardlow was the 27th and the youngest ear victim at just 13 years old. Margaret was awoken by someone with leather gloves telling her to shut up, I'm gonna kill you, don't move. He tied her feet and hands with shoelaces. Margaret knew it was the ear and was aware of his MO. She heard him coming from the kitchen with dishes and immediately knew if he walked into her mom's room, he's going to rape her. And if he walked into her room, he was going to rape her mom.
Terrifying.
Yeah, I wouldn't even begin how to think, especially at her age. He walked into her mom's room, unfortunately, so she knew that she'd be the next victim. Margaret told ABC News that she had heard of the ear and felt as though she had an advantage. When Joe made threats against her mother and Margaret's life, she told him that she didn't care.
It's amazing. How to be outsmarted by a teenager there.
I love her.
Yeah, absolutely. Only a 13-year-old has that level of just confidence and snark in them to be like, I don't care.
Courage,
absolutely.
Debbie Strauss and her husband were woken up on the night of October 29th, 1977 by a flashlight. Dishes were again placed on the husband's back. Debbie was raped repeatedly. In between, Joe wandered the house yelling about his mommy. Some speculate he was actually saying Bonnie and eating their food. Debbie received phone calls from Joe after the attack. The victim on December 19th, 1977 remains anonymous, and the details are unclear. We do know that 8 months after raping his 28th victim, the ear would call and say, "Merry Christmas, it's me again." The sheriff's office provided a tape recorder if the ear called back. A few weeks later, Joe calls back, and she catches the first recording of his voice. He then calls back later and threatens to kill her.
And it is truly eerie.
Yeah, it is not, I think it's going to haunt me for the rest of my life, to be honest.
Yes, because it's just you can tell he's got his teeth clenched, and he's almost whispering to her that he's going to kill her.
Yeah. In December 1977, the Sacramento Bee received a poem believed to be written by the East Area Rapist. You can look up the whole poem on the internet, but part of it states, Jesse James has been seen by all, and the son of Sam has an author. Others now feel temptation's call. Sacramento should make an offer to make a movie of my life that will pay for my planned exile.
I'm not sure what he's getting at here. It's almost like a ransom note, if you pay me, I'll go away.
Or that he's one step ahead, or he thinks he's one step ahead, so he just decides to mess with their minds a little more.
Maybe. Plus, we don't technically know that this was Joe.
Right.
And there were, other thing. California had its own shenanigans in 1977 anyways. So it might not have even been him.
Very much so.
In 1978, Joe DeAngelo moves to Stockton, California. Brian and Katie Maggiore were in Rancho Cordova. They were attacked while walking their dog on February 2nd, 1978. The police suspect that Brian and Katie ran across a prowler. Brian was a military police officer. He chased the prowler through the backyards until he was shot. Then the prowler chased Katie down and killed her. Witnesses saw the couple either running toward or from something. The police believed they were shot in someone else's backyard because they saw the EAR-ONS face and could identify him. Next to Brian's body were pre-tied shoelaces. These were linked to the Golden State Killer in 2016. Gay Wilburn and her partner Bob Hardwick were awoken to the flashlight after midnight on March 19, 1978. Gay was forced to tie her husband up at gunpoint. Both bound, blindfolded, and separated. The EAR spent a couple of hours terrifying them, raping Gay, having a beer on their porch, and getting food out of the fridge. Bob and Gay are still married 45 years later, and they are the only couple that are still married to this day.
Props to them.
Yeah. Every other marriage falls apart after this, which is just so sad. Attack number 34 was an anonymous victim on June 7, 1978. The victim is attacked in her multi-story apartment building. This attack was different. A multi-story apartment building instead of a single-story dwelling. He wore a nylon stocking instead of a ski mask, and the only weapon he had was a nail file and a screwdriver. And also the victim noted that his shirt was inside out.
I wonder what was different that day for him. Like, not using a ski mask, attacking a multi-story building.
It's a lot harder to get out of a multi-story building on the fly than it is a single story. You can climb out of any window in a single story house, but a multi-story house, you get upstairs, you're kind of stuck upstairs.
Yeah.
So this one's definitely different. This one feels very impromptu to me. It's not his usual plan of attack.
Maybe he was so obsessed with that person or that victim.
Did she make him mad? I'm not victim blaming here, but, could it have been something where she was something so small and he was able to follow her home? It does make you wonder what happened that was so impromptu that he doesn't even have a ski mask.
Yeah.
In July 1978, DeAngelo breaks down during his 37th attack as the EAR and told the victim, "I hate you, Bonnie," while crying into the victim's pillow, which is, exactly what she needs. Jumping back to 1970, Bonnie was Joe's college sweetheart and first true love. After returning from Vietnam, Joe and Bonnie attended Sierra College together. Joe took Bonnie for rides on his Honda motorcycle and hunting. Soon the relationship took a dark turn between Bonnie and Joe. During sex, Joe would leave and come back several times over a couple-hour period, very similar to the EAR. She didn't know this. Bonnie, this was her first relationship. She didn't understand that was very strange of him to come and go 2 or 3 times during sex. But to investigators later, this was really kind of like, okay, that's his MO. He would do that to the victims. Joe didn't propose, but he gave Bonnie a large engagement ring that he had bought during his time in Vietnam. When on the motorcycle one day, a German Shepherd chasing the bike was killed after Joe slowed down and maliciously kicked it in the neck. Joe would do things just to scare Bonnie. In 1971, Joe attempted to cheat on Bonnie's abnormal psychology class. But both of Bonnie's parents were teachers, and she would not allow him to cheat. This became a major problem for Joe, and eventually Bonnie broke up with him. A few nights after the breakup, Bonnie woke up to tapping at her window, and it was Joe with a gun. He told her to get dressed. They were going to Reno to get married. Bonnie ran to her parents' room. Her father told her to lock herself in the bathroom until he came for her. The police were never called. This was possibly not to ruin Joe's future in law enforcement. And it took her father 2 hours to convince Joe that she wasn't going to marry him. Bonnie and her father never spoke about the situation again. After Joe's arrest, the London Daily Mail ran an article headlined, "Is this the woman who broke the Golden State Killer's heart and sparked his murderous rampage?" Which is really sad for Bonnie because I think she dodged a bullet herself, and that feels a lot like victim blaming.
I mean, if I was her dad, I'd be like at maybe the 10-minute mark and probably call the police.
Right.
I wouldn't
2 hours.
I wouldn't have the patience.
And she was locked in the bathroom for 2 hours waiting on her dad to come for her. And her mom didn't know this was happening. She had siblings in the house. They never knew about it. And Bonnie and her dad never talked about it.
They must have had like a civil conversation, maybe.
For 120 minutes of "you're not marrying my daughter."
I mean, for it to not escalate. Like him to not kill her or her father.
Where was the gun while they're having this civil conversation? Did her dad know there was a gun? Probably. I'm sure she ran into his room in the middle of the night. And how did the mom sleep through that?
I know I wouldn't.
Separate bedrooms?
I'd be out there with my husband.
I'd be on the phone with 911.
That's true.
Somebody,
after that,
please help. My daughter's trying to be forced into Reno marriage.
Yeah, no.
At gunpoint. On Wednesday, October 18th, 1978, an anonymous victim in San Ramon, California, and her husband were attacked. We were unable to find details on the assault. This victim was interviewed for a book later, but felt the author blamed her for the rape based on her good looks. And a lot of these women were beautiful. They were gorgeous, gorgeous women. Mm-hmm. Which does not mean they should be victims, to be fair.
Exactly. On December 2nd, 1978, like so many others, Joanne Mieo and her husband were woken in the light by a knife and a flashlight. Joanne was raped. In her impact statement in court, Joanne told Joe, and I'm sure with eye contact, "You are just one of those weak, powerless men who use your physical strength to hurt women." There were 2 attacks on December 8th, 1978. Gladys Reeder was bound and raped. Her home was also ransacked. The second attack of the day by the ear was Esther McDonald. She was attacked in her Danville home. Esther is a pseudonym. The next day, on Saturday, December 9th, 1978, victim number 43 was attacked in Danville. The ear went on the pathway of railroad tracks after hopping over a fence. The officers brought bloodhounds, in which the hounds picked up a scent that hugged the fence line. It went all the way down the tracks until the intersection, but stopped because DeAngelo probably got into his car. During his escape, he dropped homework evidence. There were 2 sheets of spiral and 3-hole notebook paper bearing pencil writing. 1 sheet of spiral and 3-hole notebook paper bearing a pencil drawn map. This was a diagram of the housing development, and on the back it was written punishment.
But what are they being punished for?
Probably something that he thinks in his crazy mind.
And we still don't know. Like, he's in prison now, and we still don't know what his true motive, other than, control and a power play. What was his true motive for this?
Somebody should send him a letter in prison and write punishment on it.
I'm going to suggest you do this, but send it from a post office box, not your address.
Thanks for the tip. 1 length of purple yarn, 41 inches long, which obviously we don't think that he was tying the victims with this, because he would, you would be able to break that.
Yeah, they were using towels, like ripped towels and things like that. Shoelaces, not yarn.
Yeah. And then his other homework evidence was a fragment of paper with typewriting. And this was like an essay, maybe, they were saying, authorities were saying.
One of them looked like a 6th grader's homework, like actual homework where they were almost being punished, saying, like, I will not tell lies type of a thing. They're repeating something over and over and over again in handwriting. And he's saying, like, I hate this teacher. So they tried something in that homework, made them think that it was a male 6th grade teacher, which at the time would have been very unique. Most 6th grade teachers were women at that point. So they went through school systems trying to find anybody that would be in the ear's age bracket. How many years back could that be to 6th grade? What local schools would have had a male teacher making them write lines? And there was one guy that they interviewed, and he's like, I don't remember anything out of the ordinary, but I did make my 6th grade students write lines.
So it could have been like a piece that he stolen, even. Could
have been. Mm-hmm. We know now that he doesn't have any kids that would be of that age. So, a sibling's homework?
That's true.
Who knows? Old piece of homework he kept?
A 17-year-old girl is assaulted while babysitting. In the months prior to the June 2nd, 1979 attack, she had received hang-up calls that followed her even when she was at another home babysitting. On June 25th, 1979, Mary Burwert was 13 years old, and she was raped by the ear. Her father and sister were in the house, but did not appear to know what was happening. They later discovered that the ear had been laying on top of a playhouse and stalking Mary. He could see right in her bedroom window. This house was just 100 feet from the June 2nd, 1979 attack.
So he's casing neighborhoods, and he's laying on top of children's playhouses, looking through her window.
If I witnessed that, I'd be running out there with my bat.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty sad. And her dad later goes out, once they realize that someone could have laid there and looked right in her window, he goes out there and just tears her playset down. It's just so sad for her. She was only 13.
See, build a bigger dollhouse. That's my response.
Well, it's a single-story home, too. Not everybody's husband is a carpenter, too.
Let's go for a tree house.
Right. You got that $2,000 playset, which is still going to be looking down into her room, probably.
Let's plant a tree.
A tree.
Okay? Let's plant a tree, wait for it to grow, then make a tree house.
I'm saying some raspberry bushes with some big thorns.
Oh, here.
Just a natural deterrent.
There we go. See? We got this.
The 50th ear attack occurred on July 6, 1979 in Danville, California. A couple asleep in bed. The husband was a light sleeper and woke up to see a man in the corner of their bedroom putting on his ski mask. The husband got up and yelled at him. The wife woke up and fled the house. The ski masked man stared blankly, not really knowing what to do, and the husband finally flees. Eventually, the ear aborted the mission. A sketch was taken by the husband, who saw the suspect while putting the mask on. The book, A Sudden Terror by Larry Compton, displays this sketch. It's very creepy.
It is. And I started reading it. It looks very good. But the picture is very eerie.
It is. In July 1979, Joe DeAngelo was arrested for shoplifting in a hardware store. The item he was shoplifting were dog repellent and a hammer. When caught, he goes into a rage and they end up tying him to a chair until law enforcement arrives. Nicholas Willick of the Auburn Police Department advised they cannot have an officer committing shoplifting, and DeAngelo was terminated from his job. So he's an officer that gets busted shoplifting, loses his job. But the things that he was shoplifting is truly interesting. So victims, they talk about how he had a unique smell, a smell that they could not describe, and the victims' dogs reacted really strangely to him. So it kind of makes you wonder if he was covering himself in dog repellent, and that's why the dogs were trying to stay away. They're not protecting their owners in any way. He's also been in the houses, so maybe the dogs have already smelt that before.
Because didn't people or the victims think that was like his something seeming through his skin,
yes.
And that's what like made him smell weird?
Almost like he was so anxious about what he was doing that it was just seeping out of his pores.
It could be a combination.
I mean, I don't know what dog repellent smells like, but if the dogs are disgusted by it, I would say he's covering himself with it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The East Area Rapist rapes stop. Joe and his wife moved 400 miles south to Santa Barbara, and there was no way for Santa Barbara to connect the dots to the ear. Santa Barbara calls him the Night Stalker. Later, this is Richard Ramirez, and Joe ends up being the original Night Stalker, or ONS. A couple wake up to find DeAngelo in their house, but instead of saying he's going to rob them, he repeats over and over that he's going to kill them. The woman untied her ankles and ran out of the door. DeAngelo ran after her and said, "I told you not to scream. I told you not to make any noise." He brought her back in and tied her up again, laying her on the floor. The man then untied his ankles and went out the back door of the bedroom screaming for help. The suspect had to flee, but he stole a 10-speed bicycle, in which he abandoned near the San Jose Creek bed, along with a serrated edged kitchen knife. The victim and the neighbor were able to provide a description of the attacker. After this October 1st, 1979 attack, none of the victims survive.
So he got arrested, lost his job.
Mm-hmm. Moves to Santa Barbara.
Then he moved to Santa Barbara, and then he attacks this couple who live.
They live, but she gets out the door. He ties them both really loosely. And she gets out the door, and just for him to drag her back in.
DeAngelo tied them really loosely?
Yeah, I believe he tied them.
That's a setup, I feel. I feel like almost he was so angry at the fact that he got caught with the dog stealing the dog repellent and the hammer.
Losing his job.
Yes.
Having to move.
That he wanted the opportunity for them to make him even madder.
Mm-hmm. In the way of he's going to kill them, and the way of they're going to get away.
In the way of he's going to kill them. Mm-hmm. Like tying these loosely, So it's going to give him the opportunity to kill them.
Right, because they're not going to listen to what he's wanting them to do.
Yeah.
So he's just going to have to murder them.
Yeah.
Maybe.
That's just a theory, though.
It turns to murder after that, so it's possible. Dr. Robert Offerman and Dr. Deborah Alexandria Manning were found shot in Robert's condo on December 30th, 1979. It is speculated that Deborah was told to tie up Robert, but she tied him up loosely. Robert was able to break free and attempted to fight the suspect before they were shot. The neighbors heard gunshots at 3 a.m. These homicides were the first in a series that last from December 1979 to May 1986. Law enforcement would call the killer the original Night Stalker and eventually call him the EAR-ONS, East Area Rapist, Original Night Stalker.
Charlene and Lyman Smith were found bludgeoned to death with a fireplace log on March 16, 1980. Charlene was hired to be Lyman's secretary at his law office. Charlene and Lyman were married in 1975. Investigators noticed a bathroom window open about 2 inches that had a direct view of their room from outside. The EAR-ONS was watching them. Lyman's son from a prior marriage came over to do chores. He could hear the alarm clock ringing. Lyman's son went to the bedroom and found Charlene and Lyman on the bed. They weren't moving. Lyman was lying on his stomach with his hands and feet tied. Charlene was sexually assaulted. Drawers were open, but no signs of burglary. They were matched to DNA in 1998 after Harrington, Whittam, and Cruz. Newlyweds Patrice and Keith Harrington were found bludgeoned to death on August 19, 1980, a very similar situation to Charlene and Lyman Smith. Grass was found in Patty's hair. It was assumed a lawn sprinkler was used as the weapon.
Ron and Bruce Harrington were brothers of Keith. In 2002, Orange County District Attorney's Office contacted Bruce and shared a series of bills that were going through the legislative process in Sacramento that would authorize the use of reasonable force to extract DNA samples from prison inmates. The District Attorney's Office asked Bruce if he would provide a storyline that would bring some personal reference on why this was so important. In 2003, Senate Bill 1242 passed in California, and the forcible collection of DNA from eligible inmates became legal. At this time, California only collected DNA from felons convicted of murder and sexual assault crimes. Ron and Bruce's thoughts at the time was that their brother's killer was in prison, but California had a very limited DNA database. Bruce was trying to greatly expand the DNA database, meaning if you were arrested for a felony, you were mandated to provide a DNA sample.
Bruce put his own effort and his own money into what turned out to be Prop 69 in 2004. Bruce got 2 million signatures to qualify for the ballot. Prop 69 was passed overwhelmingly, and in 2004 was acted into law. Even though the Golden State Killer wasn't caught because of Bruce Harrington and his work with Prop 69, there are countless, thousands of people and their families getting answers. Before 2004, when Prop 69 was passed, there were 1,250 cases solved through DNA databanks. After 2004, there are now 53,000 cases solved.
Which is amazing.
Amazing. Amazing for the families.
Yep. It doesn't, unfortunately, help his family.
No.
But it helped 53,000 other families.
That had to make him feel very good.
Yeah.
I mean, still, it didn't help with his brother's case, I understand.
No.
But being able to help thousands of more,
yep,
like you did good from it.
Yeah.
And his brother would be proud.
Absolutely. On February 6, 1981, Manuela Whithoon was raped and bludgeoned to death. Her husband was in the hospital at the time of the event. This saved his life as the EAR had moved on to attacking and killing couples. The suspect had pried open the sliding back door with a screwdriver. When interviewed by police, David was able to draw a sketch of the shoe sole from 3 months earlier, matching the footprint from the night of the murder. The family cleaned up the crime scene and found a piece of Manuela's skull under the bed still. So they were in charge of cleaning up after her murder and then found a piece of her skull under the bed.
I would not be able to handle that. So they did. I wouldn't know how to.
That and poor David was looked at as suspect number 1 because he was her husband to the investigators at the time, they thought it was very convenient that he would have a viral infection and be at the hospital. Did he hire somebody to kill her, make it look like, they didn't know that there was the ear, but did they make it look like she was bludgeoned to death?
I was going to say, because the hospital staff will
the
obviously let the authorities know, hey,
he was in the bed all night.
He was in here.
Right. Yeah, so he was eventually cleared, but I think they didn't connect this until the 90s to the East Area Rapist, original Night Stalker. So they really thought this was just a one-off case with no possible motive.
Well, I don't necessarily blame them because a lot of it was sporadic.
Mm-hmm.
And even though some things were connected, his MO changed a little bit here and there.
Yep. Sherry Domingo was taking care of a family member's house, known as Aunt Barbara, when the house was for sale. Sherry and her 2 kids had moved into the home in June 1979. Gregory Sanchez, Sherry's on-again, off-again boyfriend, was visiting on July 27, 1981. Sherry was bludgeoned and Gregory was shot. Paint chips at the scene and paint on the shoelaces made people think that the suspect was a construction worker, and there was construction around the neighborhood at the time. In the early 2000s, their murder was connected to EAR-ONS by DNA. So this one was really sad because Sherry and her daughter had a rough relationship, and the last thing that her daughter said to her was, "Can you please just get out of my life?" or something very similar to that. And that was the very last thing that they would say to each other.
And she shouldn't blame herself for that. No. She shouldn't put that weight on her shoulders because it was not her fault whatsoever. But thinking that,
oh, you're a teenager just fighting with your mom. You don't know that's going to be the last conversation you have.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other interesting thing is that this house was on the market, so it was up for sale. And there are a lot of cases or a lot of victims that houses had a real estate aspect to it. They had just bought the house. They were a realtor. Their house was for sale. Some of these people had moved in a week or 2 before the attack. And this was just another one where this house is for sale. It's not even Sherry's house. Greg is an on-again, off-again boyfriend. No, it's very unique. I'm not sure that they ever did really tie the real estate piece to him, but it happens over and over. Was he going to the house showings and using that as another opportunity to case the place?
Because what was his job at this time?
He was a mechanic.
So he was a mechanic at this time.
Mm-hmm. He was a truck mechanic.
That has no connection to real estate at all.
No, not unless you're going to the house showing and checking out. Could he open the windows and things, or he's just maybe knowing the general layout of the house? I'm not sure that he could leave a window open then. Maybe.
I don't know. He drew that diagram of that one.
Yeah, the whole neighborhood.
The whole neighborhood. So maybe that was part of his
planning.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Joe and Sharon have a daughter in September of 1981. There is a sleep period with no EAR-ONS activity from 1981 to 1986. There was a 5-year hiatus prior to his final murder on May 4th, 1986. Janelle Cruz's coworker had been keeping her company on the night of May 4th, while her family was on vacation in Mexico. They heard a sound like a gate closing in the backyard, but it was ignored as probably the cats. Later, they heard a noise in the direction of the garage, but the coworker left as it was a school night. They're so young. It's a school night. Janelle, just 18 years old, was raped and beaten to death. She's bludgeoned so hard that she swallows some of her own teeth.
Ugh.
There was blood left behind at the crime scene, but they were unable to use DNA. They did confirm, though, that Joe was a non-secretor, which means that bodily fluids does not reveal his blood type, and this is only in 20% of Caucasian men. This narrows down the search, but didn't really assist police until the genealogy testing done in 2017.
So the one victim that had the blood
in her hair
showed that he was A positive.
And Janelle shows that he's a non-secretor.
But this can't.
So we know he's A positive and we know he's a non-secretor. But that's all they have to go on. You know, he's blonde. He's got small feet for an average man.
That's rare, though, to be 20%, only 20% of Caucasian men.
But what are you going to do with that information?
Yeah.
Joe and Sharon DeAngelo welcomed a second daughter in 1986. Joe and Sharon also separated in the same year. Joe moved back to Sacramento alone as a truck mechanic.
Joe and Sharon reconcile and have a third daughter in 1989. Joe was known to have strict rules for his daughters. They were not allowed to play inside the house or be naked at any time.
At any time. That's achievable for children.
They weren't able to play inside at all?
No. They'd play
Not
outside.
even clothed? I'm sorry. I'm just thinking through the process here.
Yeah, got to play outside. All three girls from, 1981, 1986, 1989. All three have to play outside and they have to be fully dressed at all times.
Do you think that was like temptation for him?
Probably, or guilt.
Joe starts a job at the Save Mart as a mechanic. He holds this job for 27 years. In 1991, Joe and Sharon separated again. Sharon left Joe, and he felt very angry about the separation. They are separated until their divorce in 2019. So did his wife know anything?
That's a good question. You know she has to be a victim of being very controlled by him.
Yeah.
Because he's trying to control strangers.
Yeah.
So I would assume he's controlling her and the daughters.
Did she ever speak out about
Just
this?
asking for privacy. She's
Okay.
just asking, they were shell-shocked. They had no idea. This is living with a stranger, basically. He had this second life that she had no idea about. And the kids talk about what a great dad he was. So obviously they didn't think it was weird that they had to be fully dressed or that they needed to play outside.
Yeah. Because Bonnie, obviously, she
knew.
She spoke out, I believe, about it. But, hey, I get it.
Yeah, well, and Sharon's dad was arrested for being a peeping Tom as well. So maybe there was some things that she was writing off as normal and ordinary that maybe was not so normal or ordinary.
That's true.
Oh, my husband's gone every evening.
Yeah.
3 evenings in a row. And it just happens to be the same time as these ear attacks. Like, you're not going to put that together, connect some dots there that...
No, my dad did it. It's normal.
It's cool. It's fine.
Sharon was a family law attorney. Wow.
She's very smart.
She did not follow through with divorce proceedings until after his arrest 27 years later.
So they were separated for 27 years. So obviously it wasn't all...
She moved out.
She moved out, yeah. He actually lives in that same home that they bought together all that time.
I wonder what their co-parenting was like.
That's a good question.
Like, were they the majority of the time with her?
The youngest daughter's living with him when he gets arrested.
Because I would think if it was temptation, being alone with his daughters could even be more of temptation.
Makes you think it's more derived from guilt.
Yeah.
That he just doesn't want to think about what he's done.
Yeah. We'll go with your point.
We're going to say it was guilt.
A prior victim receives a phone call from Joe in 1991. She was attacked 15 years previously. Victim could hear children and a woman in the background.
So don't mind me, honey. I'm going to go over here and make this call to my victim from 15 years ago.
So he was keeping tabs.
Yeah, keeping their phone numbers and their addresses. Like, did he have an address book? Was that found in the house when they busted him?
I don't know. I think I heard that nothing was found. Like,
So he's memorized their phone numbers? Which is a whole nother level of terror.
I mean, you did say he was smart.
He's very smart.
Book smart.
He's book smart.
Orange County Sheriff's Department started submitting DNA to the newly formed CODIS, Combined DNA Index System. The Sheriff's Department figures out EAR and Night Stalker are the same person, as they are able to compare EAR-ONS DNA from the 3 rape kits obtained during the ear attacks.
Just 3 rape kits.
Out of 50.
Out of 50. And we're assuming that every victim, like with 50 rapes, you're assuming every victim came forward. And you know statistically they do not.
Yeah.
So there's a potential huge number of victims out there that have not come forward.
It probably goes into play with pretty much every parent or husband wanting to keep it a secret or concealed.
The stigma with being the rape victim. Yeah. The blame game.
Jeesh.
Yeah. So it's horrifying. But they took 3 rape kits. So at least they took those 3.
I guess. Always looking on the bright side. They also connect the cases of 1980 Patrice and Keith Harrington, 1981's Manuela Whithune, and 1986 Janelle Cruz. The Orange County Cold Case Unit exhumed the body of a suspect in Baltimore in 1997. A fingerprint was found on a victim's lamp. Prior to 9/11, teeth and hair of the suspect were in the detective's carry-on bag, but a femur with dry ice was in the checked luggage.
Yikes.
When the detective picked up the checked bag, it was leaking in the luggage carousel.
That is so gross.
The DNA was not a match. The suspect was later found to have been a friend of the victim's boyfriend. The friends had a falling out, and the house was burglarized, apparently by the ex-friend, before the EAR attacked.
So this is another couple that had recently bought their house. So within a couple weeks of moving in, they had been burglarized by the friend, and then burglarized or cased out by the EAR-Original Night Stalker, and then actually the victim of, rape. So just horrible timing. Like, he just happened to be there and touch a lamp. But they were so close to thinking, hey, we caught this guy.
Yeah.
And it was just shenanigans, a hot mess express.
Ugh.
On April 6, 2001, DeAngelo calls a victim and says, remember when we used to play? 2001.
That would, the hairs on my neck are standing up.
In 2013, Michelle McNamara nicknames the suspect the Golden State Killer in the article In the Footsteps of a Killer, published by the Los Angeles Magazine, and the name sticks, which it is a lot easier to say the Golden State Killer than it is to say EAR-ONS.
Yes, it is.
The East Area Rapist DNA is uploaded to the public database, attempting to find a match or an ancestral surname. So they're literally trying to find his last name. Father to son at that point in 2013. Michelle McNamara died in her sleep on April 21st, 2016. The book was half complete at this time, so colleagues stepped in to arrange the notes into a book. She left behind a whopping 3,500 computer files, thousands of computer photos of police reports, notebooks, and 37 boxes of files from the Orange County Prosecutor's Office. So just a huge amount of information that they had to go through to finish her book. And it is an amazing book. Like, they did it really, really well.
And she passed away from her heart right in the middle of the night.
Yeah, so she was having a really hard time sleeping. And in the beginning of the book, she talks about having insomnia. But I think she was also having a hard time managing that. She's now taking medication to put herself asleep. So then she's taking medication as an upper to wake herself up. They found fentanyl in her system, so she's obviously getting things from other places as well. But it's 2016, so fentanyl was not known to be as much of a killer as it is today. Mm-hmm. Now you wouldn't prescribe somebody fentanyl to help them sleep. And I think maybe back then they were. And her heart just couldn't take it. So she left behind her husband, Patton Oswalt, and their young daughter, Alice. Which is very sad. It's just another life taken over this investigation.
Yeah. In 2017, the EAR-ONS DNA was submitted to GED Match. Investigators had to work backwards, starting with 1,000 broad suspects. They narrowed it down based on age, sex, and location. The list was narrowed down to 20 men. DNA then helped to narrow down even further to show that their suspect would have premature baldness and blue eyes. Naked mole rat.
Yes. Agreed.
The new list is then narrowed down to only 6 candidates. Joe's 4th cousin was in the list. It took 4 months for investigators to work on a family tree to find the right characteristics. A 73-year-old Oregon man was also on the list, but DNA taken from the man's nursing home ruled him out.
Whew.
I wonder if he knew what they were doing.
I don't know.
Like if they just walked in the nursing home and been
Take a tissue.
Yeah.
Well, they were really sneaky with Joe, so maybe they were really sneaky with him too.
I don't know if they would be sneaky in this scenario. I feel like they would just walk right in because he's confined
in a nursing
into
home.
the nursing home. What is he going to do? Run away in his wheelchair? He can't run.
You don't. First off, he's only a year older than Joe DeAngelo, and he's out there riding his motorcycle and acting like a 50-year-old.
That's true.
It's true. So maybe he's not in a wheelchair. He could have run away. I hope we're not in a wheelchair when we're 73.
I will be. In 2018, Joe was living in Sacramento. His youngest daughter and granddaughter lived with him. An undercover detective obtained a DNA sample from a discarded tissue and a swab from a car door handle to confirm it matches the DNA on file.
See how sneaky they were?
Yeah.
Undercover detective.
I know. Joe DeAngelo was finally arrested on April 24, 2018. Police found guns in his house. They pulled up carpet, dug small holes in the backyard, and looked through his shed that had his granddaughter's pink furniture. When questioned, he sat in the room motionless, not talking hardly, and then was taken to jail. And then I heard that when he was arrested, or they were putting him under arrest, he says, "I've got a roast in the oven."
Yeah, we don't care, Joe. Those detectives deserve to eat that roast. Oh my gosh. They deserve dinner. Give them a good roast dinner.
Or maybe he knew and he poisoned the roast.
Oh,
see,
snap.
my mind goes a lot darker than yours.
Do not eat the roast.
At the arraignment hearing on April 27, 2018, Joe presented himself as a frail old man, but neighbors in the sheriff's office knew that this was a sympathy play. Joe was indicted on 13 counts of first-degree murder. They were unable to charge with most of the rapes due to statute of limitations.
Just so sad.
Yeah, I would not like that. If I was one of the rape victims and it was just like a flyby, like, oh, we can't do it.
Yeah, he basically got away with it. I mean, he doesn't truly. He's still in prison, but they did at least get their day in court. They got to make statements to him.
Yes, and wear shirts.
Yes. Yes, they did.
At the trial on June 29th, 2020, Joe agreed to a plea deal and advised he would tell everything if the death sentence was removed. Victims read statements in court to Joe. Chris Petretti tells him that she's going to keep living and do good things while Joe rots in hell. Chris has a Facebook group, Sexual Assault Survivors. It's time to tell your story. Go give it a like.
Absolutely.
Joe receives 13 life sentences for first-degree murder with special circumstances and 13 counts of kidnapping. There is no possibility of parole. He removes his mask and isn't frail when he makes his statement. Joe does apologize for everyone that he hurt, but is it true? Joe is serving his sentence in California State Prison.
Yeah, I don't think it's... I don't think it's true. No. I think he's sad he got caught. I think he was 70 years old and thought he was getting away with it.
Well, and then he also told people that he had that alter ego named Jerry.
Oh, right.
Who did all this bad stuff.
Yeah, he tries to come across as, you know, an older person, elderly. He's frail. When they ask him questions, he has like a delay and he's like, who, what, me? Like he can't respond to them in full sentences. And then, yes, he's got this
pathetic.
Yeah, he's got this alter ego that he also tries to blame that on. And then when he sees that's not working, then suddenly he's like, well, guess we'll try a different tactic here.
And they video recorded him in his cell, pulling himself up just fine onto a desk.
Yeah, and he was covering a light.
Yes, he was covering a light with something. I don't know.
Was it newspapers?
Newspaper or cardboard. I wouldn't think they would give you cardboard in jail. But...
Well, and it's another thing that's a throwback to his EAR-ONS day as well. You know, because he would cover the TV with just enough light to see with, but not... Maybe he's got really sensitive eyes. So he could see, but not necessarily alert the neighbors that somebody was awake in the house at midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning.
Jerry's eyes were sensitive.
Yeah, not Joe. Jerry's eyes. In 2021, Joe is transferred to the Protective Housing Unit at California State Prison. This is for inmates whose safety would be endangered by general population housing or they have medical needs. So he is in his 70s. He could have medical needs. What you guys couldn't see is Angela just full on rolled her eyes. What we really think is, he's probably endangered by general population.
Yeah, I would have kept him there.
Today, we have eye for an eye justice. Today in 2024, one of Joe's daughters is an emergency room physician and another daughter is a graduate student at the University of California. The youngest daughter spoke out at Joe's court hearing in 2021, saying that he was the best father and grandfather. Anything they needed, he provided, which is just so heartbreaking. Like, his family really is no exception here.
Yeah, it really is heartbreaking.
Like, they were just as affected. They just didn't know what was coming for them.
People can live double lives.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. He absolutely did.
And that's what he did. Joe and Jerry, obviously.
This case did bring about advancements like more women in law enforcement, rape kits, and 911 emergency services. In the 1970s and 80s, rape was not a mandatory state prison crime, but more likely to get probation, which is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
Calling 911 would sometimes take 20 rings before someone answered. Women protested this at the courthouse because they felt they weren't protected. They fought for 911 emergency services, a rape awareness week, funding for rape crisis centers, and transparency in how police handle rape cases.
To not have 911.
Yeah.
Wow.
Shows you how really entitled we are. That even if you don't have cell service, you can still dial 911 and reach somebody, emergency dispatch, to help you.
Mm-hmm. Heck, we can even yell out Surrey and she'll do it for us.
Oh, there you go. Not all of us have iPhones.
Sorry, Android users, aka Paige.
Yep, that would be me. So for our sources, I watched a Evil Among Us documentary on the Golden State Killer from 2023. I'll Be Gone in the Dark book by Michelle McNamara, which is a fantastic read. I highly recommend that. Forensic Genealogy, Bioethics, and the Golden State Killer Case in the National Library of Medicine 2019 article. A Oxygen article on the Golden State Killer, the East Area Rapist victims and survivors, and the LA Times article on The Man in the Window.
I had watched Unmasking a Killer from Max, and it's since 2013. I also watched Inside Edition on YouTube. And then I read an article called Lot of Shame, Lot of Anger from the Mercury News 2018. You can reach us at corruptpod@gmail.com or corrupt.podcast on Instagram. Don't forget to subscribe to catch our next episodes. Please also leave us a review wherever you're listening to this podcast. Bye-bye.
Bye.